al-Ikwaan, al-Muslimeen, the Muslim Brotherhood. And this group began in Egypt in the late 20s, 1929 specifically. And the man who was behind this group was called Hassan al-Banna. And this man was a Sufi. He was a Sufi, a man who would visit the graves. He was a member of a Sufi order called the Hasafiyya. And Egypt at that time was a place in which there was a British occupation. And so this man, Hassan al-Banna, he basically decided to set up an organization which would try to unite the Muslims. And his concept of unity was not the concept of unity that we understand as people of the Sunnah. Why? Because as people of the Sunnah we understand that we can only unite upon the book and the Sunnah and the Aqidah and the Manhaj of the Salaf al-Salih. However, this man, his innovation was that we unite with everybody with whom we have something in common. And as for all of the affairs of difference, then we pardon each other, and we forgive each other, and we overlook each other. And this principle was such that he even included the affairs of innovation and the affairs of shirk. So for example, amongst the people that he united with, or that he called for unity with, was the Rafida Shia of Iran. Those people who revile the companions, and they have beliefs of shirk in their so-called imams and the so-called sons of Allah, the ayatollahs as they say. So he had no problem with uniting with them. And he has certain statements where he says that the people of the Sunnah and the Shia, both of them are upon the same thing. Both of them are upon naqa, upon purity. These are his words. Likewise, with all of the various groups of innovation, such as the people of Ta'til, those who negate Allah's names and attributes, the people of I'tizal, the people who, for example, deviate on the issue of Qadr, or the Jahmiyyah, or the Sufiya, or the Mutasawwifa, or the Rafida as I mentioned, until even the Christian Copts. There's a large community of Christians, they are known as the Copts in Egypt. Even with them, they open their arms to working with them. So the principle or the point that I'm getting across here is that a main aspect of the ideology of this man, Hassan al-Banna, was opening up the doors to all of the people of innovation and breaking down the barriers which existed between the Sunnah and the people of innovation. And the ideas of this man were such that they would be carried in later decades, through the 1930s, through the 1940s, through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up until our time. And this happened by way of organizations and jama'at and jama'iyat and other people, individuals who came and they propounded upon this ideology and then they spread it in the different lands. Up until our time today, we find that so what you see today when we speak about this issue of lenience towards Ahlul Bidah and, not being too lax with them and not being too easy with them and not mixing with them and how many people don't understand this? The roots and the origin of this problem today lies in the ideology of this man in the 1930s, right? So this is this is the founder of al-Ikwaan, al-Muslimeen, Hassan al-Banna. And this was the effect of his da'wah upon the ummah. That everybody, this idea that spread amongst the minds of the people that everybody's okay, as long as he says La ilaha illallah, and he says that he's upon the sunnah, then he's okay. And as for his mistakes, even if they be in usul, in aqidah, in manhaj, even in the affairs of tawheed or shirk, then turn your eyes away from his faults. This is the effect and the way of thinking that Hassan al-Banna spread amongst the ummah. And this is found amongst the people today who claim they're upon the manhaj of the Salaf, or those who claim that they're upon the Salafi da'wah. So the roots of this lie in the ideology of Hassan al-Banna. So this is one major trend, or one major way of thinking, which brought about damage and destruction to the affairs of the Sunnah, and to the affairs of the manhaj of the Salaf al-Salih. Now if we move on 3 decades later, in the 1950s, then we see the emergence of another man who again, just like Hassan al-Banna, he brought another way of thinking and another trend, like an ideological trend within the Ummah. And this man is Sayyid Qutb. And Sayyid Qutb, after Hassan al-Banna, was one of the main figureheads and the leaders of Ikhwan al-Muslimeen. Now this man, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, was an Ash'ari. Initially in his life, he had an Islamic upbringing and he was taught in a Muslim school. And later on, because in Egypt there was a lot of secularism and communism and so on and so forth, for about 15 or so years in his life, he was basically someone who doubted. He was affected by the socialism and communism, and he even doubted about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And within these years, 15 or so years, he spent his life in ignorance. Ignorant of the deen of Allah, and ignorant of the Sunnah. And he lived in an environment in Egypt which was full of the beliefs of the Mu'tazila and the Ash'a'ira and the Jahmiyyah, and other than them from the people of Bid'ah and Dalalah. Anyhow, this man, basically, he had certain influences upon him, and he took certain ideologies from the kuffar, or certain ways of thinking from the kuffar. So for example, he used to read the books of a man called Alexis Carrel. And this man is a French philosopher, a Christian French philosopher. And this man, Alexis Carrel, he used to write about the situation of the Christians at that time. How the Christians have basically turned their back upon their religion, and how they indulge in sin and disobedience and in music and fornication and so on and so forth. And this man, this kafir called Alexis Carrel, a French philosopher, he coined a term, he invented a term. He called it, and again look, he's speaking about the Christian communities. He says that these people have entered into an age of barbarism. He used a word called barbarism. And this is how he described what happened to Christianity. Now Sayyid Qutb, he used to read the books of this man, this kafir. And he brought the same way of thinking and he applied it to the Muslim Ummah. So what term did he invent? What term did he use? Jahiliyyah. Where did he get it from? From this kafir, mushrik, Alexis Carrel. So he brought this term and he said that today the Muslim Ummah has entered into Jahiliyyah. And it's more, as he says in his own words, it's a very severe form of Jahiliyyah. And he exceeded and exaggerated in this regard up until he treated this Jahiliyyah to be the Jahiliyyah of Kufr before Islam came. And by way of this, he made takfir of every single Muslim society upon the face of this earth. Merely because amongst the Muslim Ummah you find people who are upon sin and disobedience, and they drink, and they gamble, and they fornicate, and they fall into all sorts of major sins. So being affected and influenced by this man, this kafir, mushrik philosopher, then he brought this ideology amongst the Muslim Ummah, and by way of it, he made takfir of the Muslim Ummah. And on top of that, he made takfir of the rulers who didn't rule by what Allah has revealed in all of the affairs of the state. So if they had any deficiency in certain affairs, he said that either it's complete Iman, 100%, and you rule by everything which Allah has revealed, or it's nothing. Right? Black and white. So he brought this extremism and exaggeration. And so he said that basically that the way forward is that we face and address these rulers, and we remove this, these ignorant laws and rules which we are ruled by. We have to topple them, we have to remove them. And basically he created a certain picture about the da'wah, which made the people think that the da'wah is about takfir of the rulers, and focusing our attention upon them, and their sins, and their disobedience, and their oppression, and their iniquities. And that Tawheed is represented in removing these rulers and giving Allah back His right to judge. This is his way of thinking. That Tawheed is that we snatch away the authority from these rulers upon the land and we give it back to Allah. As if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in need of people to give Him His right which the people have taken away. As if Allah is in such a need. And these are the exact words that I've just said to you. These are his exact words, more or less, which he included within his books. So now the point to understand here is that by way of the writings of this man and the books of this man, a new ideology emerged within the Muslim Ummah. And it spread from the 50s through to the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And it started in Egypt and it moved to Jordan, Syria. And then over time you found that this ideology found its way in Algeria and now in more recent times in Saudi Arabia. So, on the one hand we have Hassan al-Banna, the founder of al-Ikwaan, al-Muslimeen, who brought this ideology of lenience and accommodation of Ahlul Bidah. And on the other hand we have this other man, Sayyid Qutb, who brought this ideology of being concerned with the rulers and making takfir of them and belittling the scholars and claiming that they are, the people who are paid and stooges and pawns, and trying to portray Tawheed as if Tawheed is to topple the rulers and to replace the current authorities and to establish Allah's Hakimiyya, that this is the sole basis and the root of Tawheed. So these two different ways of thinking that had their roots in these two men, then many, or in fact all of the issues and the problems and the confusion in the affairs of manhaj today, in these times today, in the year 2002 or in the last decade, all of them have their roots in the ideas of these two men. And many of the people who are involved in da'wah in this time, whether they are individuals or organizations or jama'at or jam'iyyat, then you find aspects of these two ways of thinking amongst them. So just to name some examples, people like Safar al-Hawali, he's a Qutbi, he's upon the manhaj of Sayyid Qutb. Salman al-Awda, he's a Qutbi because he's upon the manhaj of Sayyid Qutb. Abdul Rahman Abdul Khaliq, he's a Bannawi, he's upon the manhaj of Hassan al-Banna, of accommodating all the people of Bid'ah and Dalala. That many Islamic groups is something good. Why? Because they can compete with each other. And when people compete with each other, then they have more zeal for the da'wah. So there's no problem with Ikhwan, or Tabligh, or Hizb al-Tahrir. This is a good thing. This is the same ideology of Hassan al-Banna, which Abdul Rahman Abdul Khaliq, he innovated into this ummah. Likewise, you have people like Muhammad al-Mas'ari, who's upon the way of Hizb al-Tahrir. Again, he makes takfir of the hukam. And he calls for revolution and toppling and the likes of these affairs. And also you have many organizations in the West like al-Muntada and Ayana and so on and so forth. And many of these organizations are headed by or are run by people who are corrupted by these ways of thinking, by these methodologies that came to them from the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay? And then you have many other people in whom you see certain manifestations or certain ways of behaving or certain statements that they make, for example, against the rulers and pointing out their deficiencies and claiming that, for example, the scholars of Saudi Arabia, the rulers, that they've thrown the Quran behind their backs, which in essence is takfir of them. You have many people again who you see certain manifestations of these ideologies being expressed upon their tongues. Okay? So now with this background, I've given you this background in order to help us to put into context some of the issues that we're going to read from the statements of Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, and in which these affairs of manhaj are clarified, and in which the madhab of the Salaf, or the way of the Salaf, is established and explained. And by way of this, inshallah ta'ala, we can have some clarity, and also it's the basis of unity, or the basis of unity that we call the Muslims too. The Shaykh was asked that does a correct manhaj, a correct methodology, does paradise and hellfire depend upon it? هل يتوقف على صحة المنهج Jannatun aw nar. So the Shaykh replied, yes. نعم المنهج إذا كان صحيحا صار صاحبه من أهل الجنة. That when a manhaj, when a methodology, when a person's manhaj and his methodology is sahih, is correct, meaning it's upon the way of the Salaf, upon the way of the Sahaba, upon the way of the Imams of the earliest times, like Imam Ahmad, and Imam Bukharee, and Sufyan ibn Uyayna, and Sufyan al-Thawri, and the Imams of the Salaf who wrote books in clarification of this manhaj. Then when it is sahih, then he is from the people of paradise. So he says, and then he says, so therefore when it is upon the manhaj of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the manhaj of the Salaf al-Salih, then he will be in paradise by Allah's permission. By Allah's permission he will be in paradise. وَإِذَا صَارَ عَلَى مَنْهَجِ الدُّلَّالِ فَهُوَ مُتَوَعَّدٌ بِالنَّارِ. However, when he proceeds upon the manhaj of those who are astray, the astray people, which in our times are the likes of Hassan al-Banna, and Sayyid Qutb, and Muhammad Surur, and Abdul Rahman ibn al-Khaliq, and Aid al-Qarni, and Ayana, and al-Muntada, and all of these jama'at that you have today, who are run by people who are confused, and upon deviation, and upon misguidance. Then when a person proceeds upon the manhaj of the dullal, who are them, then he is under the threat of the hellfire. And then he says, فَصِحَّةُ الْمَنْهَجِ مِنْ عَدْمِهَا يَتَرَتَّبْ عَلَيْهَا جَنَّةً أَوْ نَارٍ. So therefore the correctness of a person's manhaj, and its opposite or its absence, then paradise or hellfire follows on from it, depends upon it. Likewise, the Shaykh, Hafizahullah, was asked, what is Salafiyya? Ma hiya Salafiyya? And is it obligatory to traverse upon its manhaj? Is it obligatory to travel upon the manhaj of Salafiyya and to hold fast to it? And so he replies, As-Salafiyya hiya sayr ala manhaj salaf min as-sahaba wa tabi'in wal qurun al-mufaddala fil aqidah. So he says that Salafiyya is to traverse upon the manhaj of the Salaf. Salafiyya is to traverse upon the manhaj of the Salaf, to be upon the manhaj of the Salaf. From the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and those generations which have been preferred or given excellence. And this manhaj is in Aqidah. And it's in Fahm. Meaning that we have a manhaj in understanding the book and the Sunnah. And in Suluk, meaning in the way that we behave. And the way that we proceed in the affairs of ibadah and the affairs of akhlaq and other than that. So he says it's obligatory upon the Muslim to traverse upon this manhaj. And then he brings some verses in the Quran which Ahlul Sunnah use as a proof to show the obligation of following the manhaj of the Salaf, of the first few generations. So he quotes the verse in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 100, والسابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه. And those who came foremost, the first people from the muhajirin, from those who emigrate, and the Ansar, the helpers, and those who follow them in goodness, Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Him. And this is an ayah to show the obligation of following the muhajirin and the Ansar. And likewise, when he quotes the verse, وقال تعالى والذين جاءوا من بعدهم يقولون ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا. And those who came after them, they say, O our Lord, forgive us and forgive our brothers, those who preceded us in Iman, and do not place in our hearts any hatred or aversion towards them. And then he quotes the saying of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, عليكم بسنتي وسنة الخلفاء الراشدين المهديين من بعدي تمسكوا بها وعدوا عليها بالنواجذ وإياكم ومحدثات الأمور فإن كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة دلالة. Upon you is the sunnah and the sunnah of the rightly guided khulafa who came after me. Hold on to that and bite onto it with your molar teeth. And beware of the newly invented matters, for every newly invented matter is an innovation, and every innovation is misguidance. And likewise, the Shaykh Hafidhahullah was asked the following question, and again this relates to the manhaj, that in this time, walhamdulillah, that the da'wah to the manhaj of the Salaf and holding fast to it has increased. So this call to holding fast to the manhaj of the Salaf is something that has increased, and alhamdulillah we see this. We see both in the Muslim lands, due to the efforts of our scholars, the likes of Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, the likes of Sheikh Rabi ibn Hadi al-Madkhali, the likes of Sheikh Fali al-Harbi, the likes of Sheikh Ahmad al-Najmi, and likewise those who passed away from the likes of Sheikh Ibn Baz rahimahullah, and Sheikh al-Albani rahimahullah, and Sheikh Muqbil rahimahullah, and Sheikh Al-Muslimeen rahimahullah. By way of the da'wah and the efforts of these scholars and these imams who clarified many of the affairs of manhaj, affairs in which there is confusion in these times, by way of their statements and their books and their clarifications, we find that generally speaking the call to the manhaj of the Salaf in those issues in which there is deviation, as I mentioned earlier, something that is increased, walhamdulillah. And likewise in the West, it's something that is increased, walhamdulillah. In Europe, and in the UK, and in America, and in Canada, and other places. Why? Because of the connection, walhamdulillah, between the shabab and the du'at and the scholars in the Muslim lands. So the questioner, he says, so alhamdulillah, this is something that is increased. However, there are some people who say that this da'wah, meaning this da'wah of Salafiyya and the call to the Salafi manhaj is something which is there to split the ranks and to destroy the ranks, separate the ranks, and to make the Muslims to attack each other, for them to strike each other, and for them to become occupied with one another, away from their true enemies, the kuffar. So is this claim, is it correct? And what is your direction and your advice with respect to this? So the questioner, he's explained something that we find, all of us hear this kalam coming from the people of Hizbiyah, and the people of Dalala, and those people who are upon the manhaj of the Dullal, as Shaykh al-Fawzan himself said. This is an argument that they bring, and something by which they mean to attack the Salafi da'wah, and something by which they mean to silence the Salafis from speaking about the affairs of manhaj. The affairs of manhaj which relate to refuting Ahlul Bidah, or the affairs of manhaj which relate to how do we behave with the rulers. Why? Because they themselves are people who are upon the manhaj of Sayyid Qutb and the manhaj of al-Banna, which is represented in accommodating everybody into their da'wah, to gain numbers, to give their da'wah strength, by which they can then face up to the rulers, or to make takfir of them, or to remove them, or to replace them. So this is a claim that these people bring to prevent the likes of us, who are upon the Salafi da'wah, and who are connected to the ulama, from speaking about these issues, to bring about clarity in this da'wah. So Shaykh Hafidhahullah, he replies and he says that this, meaning this claim, is from turning the realities the other way around. I mean, this is a kadhib. And this is someone who makes something black into white, and someone who makes something white into black. He turns the realities the other way around. And then he says, because the da'wah to tawheed and the manhaj, لأن الدعوة إلى التوحيد ومنهج السلف الصالح تجمع الكلمة. Because in fact this da'wah to tawheed that we call to, and the da'wah to this manhaj that we call to is something, or the manhaj of the salaf al-salih, this is what unites the kalima. This is what unites the word. Just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, كما قال الله تعالى وتوحد الصف. Yeah, and it's something that makes the ranks to be one. كما قال الله تعالى وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. So he brings this verse, and hold all of you to the rope of Allah, all of you together, and do not be divided. And this ayah is a proof to show that the basis of unity is the aqidah and the manhaj and the understanding of the Salaf al-Salih. And that to call to that is from the unity. And to refute what opposes it is from unity. And then he quotes the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَقَالَ تَعَالَى إِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاعْبُدُونَ. Really, this ummah of yours is a single ummah, and I am your Lord, so therefore worship me alone. So then he says, and it is not possible, it's not possible for the Muslimeen that they are united except upon the kalima of Tawheed and the manhaj of the Salaf. And this is the haqq. It's impossible for the Muslims to unite except upon the affairs of Tawheed and the manhaj of the Salaf. And just from these words alone, you can see